July 9th, 1973. The experiment is officially over. We are looking at a sprawling, high-tech metropolis. It was built with a single purpose: to be a biological paradise. There is no disease here. There are no predators. The temperature is a perfect 68 degrees. And the food hoppers, they are full. There is enough water and grain to sustain thousands of residents for years. But if you look closely at the nesting boxes, you will find nothing but silence. This is Universe 25. It was designed to be a utopia for mice, a place where they could live without fear, without hunger, and without suffering. The architect, Dr. John B. Calhoun, calculated that this city could comfortably house 3,840 residents. But the population never reached that number. It peaked at just 2,200, and then it collapsed. It didn't collapse because of a plague, and it didn't collapse because of starvation. It collapsed because of a mysterious psychological sickness that Calhoun called the behavioral sink. Within less than 2 years, this perfect society descended into a nightmare of senseless violence, sexual deviance, child abandonment, and finally, total apathy. The residents didn't just die physically. They died spiritually long before their hearts stopped beating. Today, we are opening the doors to Universe 25 to investigate the crime scene. We need to answer one terrifying question. When we eliminate all struggle from life, do we create paradise? Or do we create hell? To understand the tragedy, we have to understand the architect. Dr. John B. Calhoun was not a mad scientist. He was a highly respected ethologist working for the National Institute of Mental Health. And the year is 1968. This context is critical. In the late 60s, the human world was terrified of one thing: overpopulation. Cities were swelling. Slums were expanding. Books like The Population Bomb were predicting that humanity would soon breed itself into extinction. Calhoun wanted to know the truth. He wanted to know what happens to a social animal when all physical needs are met. But space is limited. So, inside a laboratory in Maryland, he built the universe. Picture a massive square pen. It's about 2.7 meters wide on each side. The walls are high, impossible to climb. Inside, Calhoun created a grid of 16 distinct sectors. Think of them as apartment blocks. Each sector had stairwells leading to nesting boxes. It was like a high-rise condominium for rodents. He engineered it to be maintenance-free. The food hoppers were designed so that hundreds of mice could eat at once without fighting. Water flowed endlessly from a specialized system. The floor was covered in ground corn cobs, kept clean to prevent disease. He even calculated the social physics. He knew that mice form social groups. So, he structured the tunnels and boxes to allow for privacy and hierarchy. On paper, it was perfect. Calhoun had removed every single factor that limits life in the wild. In nature, you die because you are cold, or a hawk eats you, or you can't find berries. Here, death by nature was impossible. The only limit was the metal walls. Calhoun was playing God, but he wasn't testing their bodies. He was testing their minds. He called this setup a mortality-inhibiting environment. But as he looked down into the empty, clean pen in July of 1968, waiting for the first residents to arrive, he had no idea that he had actually built a machine designed to destroy the maternal instinct. On July 9th, 1968, the residents arrived. Calhoun released 4 pairs of mice into the enclosure, 4 males and 4 females. These were the Adams and Eves of Universe 25. For the first 104 days, nothing spectacular happened. Calhoun called this Phase A. It was a period of adjustment. The mice were exploring their new world, marking territories, and building their initial nests. It was quiet. It was peaceful. Then the first litter was born, and Universe 25 entered Phase B, the exploit period. This was the golden age. The population exploded. It was doubling every 55 days. Imagine that speed. In less than 2 months, the entire society would double in size. The resources were unlimited, so every baby survived to adulthood. There was no infant mortality. It was a biological miracle. We saw the formation of a healthy society. The strongest males claimed the best apartments, the ones closest to the food tunnels. They gathered harems of females. They defended their borders. The social machine was working perfectly. If you looked at the graph during Phase B, it looked like a rocket ship taking off. By day 315, the population had surged from 8 mice to 620. Inside the enclosure, it was a bustling, high-energy city. Mice were running through the tunnels, eating together, and socializing. To an outsider, this looked like a triumph. Calhoun had created a world where life could flourish without restraint. But if you knew what to look for, you could already see the cracks in the foundation. Because while the food was unlimited, the number of meaningful social roles was not. In the wild, young mice grow up and leave to find their own territory. But here, there was nowhere to go. The paradise was becoming a cage, and the rocket ship was about to hit an invisible ceiling. Day 315 marks the turning point. We enter Phase C, the stagnation phase. Suddenly, the exponential growth stopped. The population was still growing, but the speed crashed. Instead of doubling every 55 days, it now took 145 days. Why? Here is the confusing part. There was still plenty of physical space. The enclosure could hold nearly 4,000 mice, and there were only 600. Most of the nesting boxes were actually empty. So why did they stop breeding? Because while the physical space was empty, the social space was completely jammed. Think of it this way. To get food or water, every mouse had to travel through the public tunnels. With 600 mice moving around, the traffic in these tunnels became overwhelming. The dominant males, the alpha mice, had a specific job: to guard the entrance to their nesting boxes. But now, instead of chasing away 1 or 2 intruders a day, they were facing hundreds. Imagine living in a huge, empty mansion. You have plenty of bedrooms, but every time you open your front door, there are 50 strangers standing there, trying to push their way in. The dominant males became exhausted. They were fighting battles every single minute. Eventually, they couldn't keep up. They simply burned out. They stopped defending their territory. They gave up. And this triggered a chain reaction. With the guards gone, random intruders started invading the nests freely. Nursing females were panicked. The social structure collapsed. So, the problem wasn't that the hotel was full. The problem was there was a riot in the lobby. By 1969, Universe 25 had become a war zone. Calhoun watched as the social order completely disintegrated. He gave this phenomenon a name that would become famous in psychology: the behavioral sink. It was a total collapse of civilized behavior. The outcast males in the center of the pen, they weren't just passive anymore. They were becoming victims. Their tails were chewed off. Their bodies were covered in scars. And yet they stayed there, huddled in a mass of misery. But at the other end of the spectrum, a new, terrifying class of mice emerged. Calhoun called them the probers. These were hyperaggressive males. But unlike the dominant alpha males of the past, The probers respected no territory. They respected no rules. They roamed the enclosure like gangs. They would chase females into their private nesting boxes. They would attack them. And then the most disturbing behavior began. Cannibalism. Remember, the food hoppers were full. There was absolutely no need to eat flesh to survive. But the social stress was so intense, it overrode their basic biology. Amidst this chaos, the females were left alone to defend their nests. Because their male partners had given up, the females had to become aggressive. They started fighting off the intruders. But this aggression came at a terrible cost. The mothers became so stressed, so filled with rage, that they lost the ability to distinguish between enemy and child. They began to attack their own babies. We saw mothers wounding their young. We saw them kicking them out of the nest before they were weaned. The sanctuary had become a slaughterhouse. The older generation was violent. The younger generation was traumatized, and the population started to crash. While the probers were tearing society apart with violence, another group was quietly emerging in the shadows. This group is perhaps the most haunting discovery of the entire experiment. Calhoun called them the beautiful ones. These were males who looked perfect. They had no scars. Their fur was sleek and unblemished. Their tails were intact. Why? Because they had completely withdrawn from life. They didn't fight. They didn't court females. They didn't try to mate. They didn't care about territory. Their lives were reduced to 3 simple activities: eating, sleeping, and grooming themselves. That was it. They were narcissists in the purest form. They avoided all violence, but they also avoided all connection. They looked at the chaos around them, the cannibalism, the fighting, the screaming, and they simply turned away. They were autistic-like in their social behavior. They lived in the city, but they were not of the city. Calhoun noted that these beautiful ones usually appeared in the later generations. These were mice born into a world that was already crowded and broken. They saw no empty niche to fill. They saw no role to play. So, they chose to play no role at all. They were physically healthy. In fact, they were the healthiest mice in the enclosure. But spiritually, they were empty shells. They were the ultimate end product of the behavioral sink. They represented a society that had lost its purpose. And the most terrifying part, because the beautiful ones refused to breed, and the females had stopped caring for their young, the birth rate didn't just drop. It hit 0. The city was full of young, healthy, beautiful bodies. But there was no future. The collapse of a society doesn't start at the top. It starts at the bottom. It starts in the home. In Universe 25, the most devastating blow wasn't the violence of the males. It was the death of the mother. In a healthy mouse society, nursing females are calm. They rely on the males to patrol the borders and keep threats away. But in the chaos of the behavioral sink, that protection evaporated. The females were forced to become the warriors. They spent their days fighting off the probers and the aggressive intruders. They were in a constant state of high adrenaline combat. And this stress rewired their brains. Calhoun observed a terrifying phenomenon called aggression transfer. The mothers would fight an intruder, and then, still filled with rage, they would turn around and attack their own children. The nest, the one place that was supposed to be safe, became the most dangerous place in the city. This led to a complete breakdown of cultural tradition. You see, being a mouse isn't just about instinct. It is also about learning. Young mice learn how to court, how to fight, and how to raise young by watching their parents. But in Universe 25, the chain of teaching was broken. The babies who survived the maternal attacks were kicked out too early. They grew up without ever experiencing love or proper socialization. They were orphans in a crowded city. They didn't know how to build nests. They didn't know how to mate. They didn't know how to be mice. They were physically alive, but socially, they were blank slates. Calhoun realized that the capacity for complex social behavior is fragile. It has to be taught. And once the mothers stopped teaching, the civilization was doomed. There was no one left to pass the torch. By 1970, the population growth had stopped completely. We now enter Phase D, the death phase. The numbers began to crash. The probers died of old age. The violent females passed away. The population dropped from the peak of 2,200 down to 1,000, then 500, then 100. And here is the great paradox. As the population dropped, the overcrowding disappeared. The food was still there. The water was still there. The beautiful, empty nesting boxes were waiting to be used again. Logically, the survivors should have started over. They should have paired up, built new nests, and rebuilt their utopia. But they didn't. The survivors were mostly the beautiful ones and the traumatized orphans from the chaos era. Even when they had the space, they simply refused to breed. Calhoun observed them closely. He saw that they had lost the cognitive ability to engage in courtship. The males would approach a female, but they didn't know the dance. They didn't know the signals. They would just stand there and then walk away. They had forgotten the language of survival. This was the point of no return. The society was so damaged that even when the cause of the problem, the crowding, was removed, the damage remained. In May 1973, the very last mouse in Universe 25 died. The experiment ended with a population of 0. Calhoun wrote a chilling conclusion in his final report. He said that for a complex animal, there are 2 types of death. There is the death of the body, but before that, there is the death of the spirit. In Universe 25, the spirit died long before the last body hit the floor. The city remained perfect. The technology worked until the very end. But the residents, they had gone extinct from the inside out. So what does this mean for us? For decades, people used Universe 25 to warn about the dangers of overpopulation. They looked at the graph and said, "See, if we have too many humans, we will destroy ourselves." But modern science suggests that this conclusion is wrong. It wasn't the number of mice that killed the city. Remember, the enclosure was never physically full. It was only at about 60% capacity when it collapsed. The real killer was social crowding. There is a big difference between high density and crowding. Density is just a number. Crowding is a psychological feeling. It's the feeling that you cannot control your social interactions. In Universe 25, the mice couldn't escape. They were forced to interact with hundreds of others every time they wanted to eat or sleep. This constant, unwanted social friction caused their brains to shut down. Does this sound familiar? Look at our modern megacities. We are more connected than ever. We are surrounded by millions of people, and yet we are seeing a massive rise in loneliness. We are seeing young people refusing to date. We are seeing the phenomenon of lying flat, people choosing to withdraw from the rat race just like the beautiful ones. Calhoun didn't prove that numbers kill us. He proved that without meaningful social roles, without a sense of purpose, and without the ability to escape the noise, a society will rot from the inside. The danger isn't that we will run out of food. The danger is that we will run out of reasons to live. Dr. Calhoun died in 1995, but his warning echoes through time. He coined a term to explain the tragedy of Universe 25. He called it the first death. He believed that a living being dies twice. The second death is when the body ceases to function. But the first death is the death of the spirit. It is the death of complex behavior, of struggle, of care for others. In his mouse Utopia, the animals experienced the first death long before the experiment ended. They had everything they needed to survive, but nothing to live for. They were biological machines, consuming resources in a void. So, as we look at our own world, with our automated conveniences, our digital isolations, and our endless resources, we must ask ourselves a hard question. Are we building a paradise? Or are we just building a very comfortable waiting room for the second death? I want to turn this question over to you. Do you see parallels between the beautiful ones or the probers and what is happening in our modern society today? Or do you think human consciousness makes us immune to this kind of collapse? Leave your perspective in the comments below. I read the most insightful ones. If you enjoy deep dives into the dark logic of our world, consider subscribing to Stratum Logic. Thank you for deep thinking with us.